at the same time. And concerning the nuclear waste, I personally think it would be better and to really recycle them and burn them, because you really reduce the amount of waste you have by a factor of hundreds, and you get a lot of energy out of it. And I think theoretically it's not fairy tale physics, but if you go to transuranics, what you happen is for instance, you have uranium, you bombard it with, you get plutonium, and you can go further, but these things are theoretically certainly possible. And what happens then over time, you could actually reduce the nuclear activity of these materials. But the thing is, we have to be very careful about these things. When we have nuclear energy, you can say, okay, you can use thorium cycle, that's true, but it's in essence not a non-renewable energy, in my opinion.
I just have a couple of comments. Thanks.
No, I'll put you on the stack. So next.
Right. Mine is more a question of policy. The energy corporations have used legal personhood to have the rights of citizens, greater financial influence, but nearly no accountability. Renewables are also being promoted for the profit of investors. All of these technologies, if somebody ultimately stands to profit, I'm wondering what the future of renewable energy would look like if everything were decentralized and less more democratic. Because for me, this would actually create manufacturing jobs for, if everybody had a solar panel and a windmill, things on their personal property. There would be no targets for terrorists, so it promotes national security. Says that we would not have to create huge transmission lines through national parks and across state lands, and would change the accountability and put it on each person. And so really, it's a question of policy. What if we put corporations back where the forefathers planned them to be, and not as citizens?
Over you two.
Yeah, I think you're right. The business model of the utility companies has to change. Utility companies have to become like the banks for energy, the intermediaries between numerous producers of energy, storers of energy, and consumers of energy. And they have to get, right now, Rocky Mountain Power prides themselves for it, that they own most of their power plants, and this is an antiquated business model. They have to become just the intermediaries, not competing with, because now they are competing with the renewables, and they don't want the renewables there because they have their own power plants. And I think this is one of the steps which we have to do. And I understand that some of the utility companies in this country have transitioned to this business model, but most of them haven't. And this is one of the things. It also has legislative and regulatory implications. But that is one of the things we have to do. Another thing we have to do is the smart grid. And the smart grid is necessary for exactly that intermediary role of the utility companies. And I have the impression they are kind of using the complexity and the lack of regulation or of standards and stuff like that to push the smart grid into the future, because once the smart grid is there, then they will are forced to do this. And one big force I see is electric vehicles. Electric vehicles will be on the market in a couple of years, and people will want to plug them in, and people will want to use their batteries for energy storage and get some money out of that. And that, I think this will be a big factor in promoting all those things. But right now, I think we should, as activists, be aware that the smart grid is really a I think it will be a binding constraint, because it takes a while. It takes at least 5 years to really make the grid smart and safe and everything. And this should be pushed right now. And I see the utility companies pushing back right now because they know that this undermines them.
I have a comment. It looks like a good idea, but the only question I have is the following. You said you were you're against like this idea of concept of transmission lines. But the proof is the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and the question is, can you guarantee this kind of thing without blackouts? That's the question.
If everybody is off of the grid, you don't have to worry about blackouts.
Yeah, but the thing is, you have industry, you know, like for instance, I I said that this British physicist, he calculated that if you just have renewables, that on the site in situ, that would be not enough. It depends also the first question you have to ask yourself is, what standard of living do we have? You know, that's a question. That's a question. And then imagine if we have the present day standard of living, then my question is, can renewables cover exactly the same demand of energy? That's a question we have to answer.
Could I respond to that? Because I got your back. I mean, I think that the grid, you know, is sort of a passe sort of idea, and blackouts are still a problem. But I think the question ought to be more, what sort of lifestyle do we want, but what can our lifestyle afford? And answering that in a, you know, if everybody is really able to incorporate their own sources of energy, then we're going to cover our own butts, and we'll make sure that, yeah, we have redundant sources, several different types of energy coming in.
I believe you can cover each other if you have transmission lines, if you connect, like for instance, certain areas have a lot of solar power, other ones have wind, but the problem always is the storage of electricity, you know? And that's a question I have, and I'm not convinced about that,
Yeah.
see?
Well, okay, so maybe I could get to my initial question, which is less a question than maybe a comment. There's a lot to gain, insight to be gained when we look through the lens of sort of a triple bottom line. You know, because typically, of course, there are costs imposed, and as I've read about some of the research that you're doing, I tend to question the costs and the advantages. You know, in relation to other avenues that we might take as a civilization, or you know, just as a means to sequester carbon. And I wonder what studies, or I was hoping you could point me to some studies that are comparative analysis between the use of what we know about the natural systems to reestablish forests that have been deforested, to you know abundicize soil that has lost fertility. You know, I think there's strong potential there. But I just, as an objective observer, wonder where I could go to look at those analyses, you know, sort of straight across the board.
Well, I think if you factor in, I can point you in the direction of some references. I can get your contact information afterwards. I've actually been working closely with some folks at the USGS and at NOAA who, that's what they do. And we put together a collection of papers last year that attempts to make that comparison, but it doesn't do it very well because it's everyone in their own research has their own agenda or their own goals, and so that cross comparison doesn't really happen. But if you go back to the estimates of how much carbon has been released through deforestation, then I think that's probably the first brute force cut at what could be gained by that.
So stopping the cutting of forests.
Right, well, and replanting, yeah. If you calculate, if someone has, and I know they have, but I've seen different estimates of it, if you can get a robust number calculation of how much has been lost through deforestation, then you could at least get that first cut of how much could be regained, and then make the direct comparison. It hasn't been done yet, but it could be done quite easily. And folks that I work with, myself, we've all talked about doing it, but we're so consumed with time, right, with, you know, by our time of current commitments that it just hasn't happened. So I'm hopeful to find someone that does have the time to do it.
So, okay, so it sounds as though the massive gains that are in the prospective future for this sequestering technique?
There's potential.
Compelling
Okay,
enough?
yeah, well, no. There's potential. There's a heck of a lot of capacity, but you're talking about a lot of capture systems installed on power plants, a lot of new power plants built, a lot of holes drilled, a lot of pipelines built. I see this as, you know, you tackle the my own bias